Hey everyone, I'm Connie Germano, Chief Casualty Officer of Dual North America, and I'm joined today by my podcast co-host, John Naus, Chief Property Officer of Dual North America. And we're super pleased to announce the second podcast. And our guest on that podcast was Bill Zachry, currently Executive Director of CompSense, former Risk Manager of the Year, and Insurance Thought Leader. Bill's someone I've known for years. I met him early in my career in New York City, and I've just sought him out over the years for his pure thought leadership. He's interesting to talk to, he's interesting to listen to, and his music was interesting as well. What did you think, John?
Yeah, I thought his music was great. Really strong choices. All of those songs will be uploaded to our playlist on Spotify, Insurance at 78 RPM, so you can hear what he had to what he chose. And it was really interesting for me, not knowing him prior to the interview. I can see why the two of you are very good friends. Super smart, very funny, had a lot to say. Growing up in property myself, just learning a little bit around comp and all those things that he did at Safeway as a risk manager, et cetera. It was really an interesting conversation, and I think our audience is really going to like it.
Great. Should we get to it?
Yeah, let's get to it.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 2.0 of Insurance at 78 RPMs. Let's get right to it and kick this second podcast off with some music. Are you ready, John?
I am. Lots of excitement.
Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm a man of will and taste. I've been around for a long
Great choice, Bill. That's a perfect introduction song for you. And today we have Bill Zachry, Executive Director of CompSense, joining us. I don't have to guess his name. He's been a friend. I've known him for years. I'm Connie Germano, alongside my podcast co-host, John Naus, and this is episode 2 of Insurance at 78 RPMs, and we're pleased to say hello to you, Bill Zachry. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm doing very well. It's great to be with you. It's certainly good to see, Connie, you've been a friend forever.
Oh, thank you. Well, where are you coming to us from today?
Well, I'm in San Carlos. It's supposed to finally get some wet weather in here. We have not had any rain for some time now, the entire month actually, and so hopefully this month we'll have a little more wet weather in California.
Yeah, well, I hope so too. You're quite a world traveler, but let's get to the music. So why this choice of a song?
The Rolling Stones, the Beatles and Rolling Stones I sort of grew up with. And in fact, I had just had a chance to go see, a few months ago, I saw the Rolling Stones at Santa Clara here. And it's very interesting to have an 80-year-old guy running up and down the stage. I think he did more than 5 miles. And that group can still play with the best of them. It's pretty neat to have the music from your youth stay with you, if you will. I really enjoy that particular song because sometimes you get obsessed with certain things, and I found that when I have that tone going through my head, I can play a better game of golf because I'm sort of listening to that music instead of worrying about how I'm swinging. And if I'm not paying attention to the swing, I actually do a lot better.
I'm gonna have to try that. That's a great life hack, Bill. Thanks. I've already learned something. We haven't been in the podcast 2 minutes. It's great.
Listen, that's a conversation with Bill. You learn much more just every minute. So let's talk a little bit about the song. It was written by Mick Jagger, I recently read a little bit about this song, and it was the opening track on the band's 1968 album, Beggar's Banquet. The song received critical acclaim and features on the Rolling Stone magazine's 500 Greatest Songs of All Time list, being ranked number 106. That's in the 2021 edition, in case there's another edition of it. It's a pretty remarkable song. It's part of one of my playlists too. So I agree with you. It's a great song. I might have to try it if it's going to improve my golf game. So Bill, we all get our first exposure to the insurance industry. Let's talk a little bit about you, and we'll stop talking about Mick Jagger. We all get our first exposure to the insurance industry in many ways, and perhaps your story is probably one of the most unique stories I've heard about getting into the insurance industry. Many of us fall into it. You literally fell into it. So let's talk about your very personal story for a minute and just describe how you got into insurance.
Well, my father passed away when I was a senior in high school, and I had to put myself through college. I had a job at the Daly City Recreation Department, and one early November afternoon, I showed up at the park to give out the basketballs and play with the kids, etc. And there were these two girls fighting. I went to break up the fight. 8 guys attacked me, and one had a knife. I was stabbed through the back several times, and the knife went through my back, through the lungs, through the diaphragm, through the spleen, and I was in the hospital for a week, and they took out my spleen. So that was I started out as an injured worker, and fairly severe injury, actually. So I have an award from Daly City for bravery. I'm not sure if I was all that brave, but it was certainly a life lesson in terms of what it's like to be injured. And because of that, my approach to taking care of the injured workers, of doing the right thing, has always been a focus on making sure that you do provide the best possible care. You do what you can to get them well and back to work kind of routine. And so that was a pretty good lesson. The neat thing about workers' comp is that you end up doing the right thing actually is not only great for the injured worker, but it really, really reduces your costs for the employer as well. And that's a remarkably wonderful situation when you can do the right thing and it benefits everybody.
Well, that's a great point, and I definitely want to get to that. Let's talk a little bit about you healed, you graduated, and we're looking for a job, like many of us at one point in our lives, and you fell into the insurance industry.
Absolutely, yeah. I got married, came back from the honeymoon. I was playing on the softball team, the right center fielder. Basically, I was saying, well, I've got a wife, I've got a degree, I need a job, and he said, oh, I work at California Casualty Management Company. I said, what do they do? And he says, oh, we manage other companies. Didn't say workers' comp, didn't say insurance. The word casualty should have been a hint, but I wasn't that smart. And he said, they just hired this dork. If they hired him, they'll hire anybody. You should apply. And 2 weeks and 4 interviews later, I was a workers' comp claims adjuster. And so it was serendipity that I ended up in the workers' compensation industry. But the very first things I was doing was going out and take statements from injured workers. And it was, I remember one guy, pretty severe injury, and I talking about what happened, et cetera. And he looks at me and goes, Sonny, you don't know what it's like to be injured. And I said, well, you want to compare scars? Because the surgeon had basically gone all the way underneath my ribs and opened me up to take out the spleen. So I had a long scar and a lot in the back where the knife had gone in. And we actually had a very good discussion. And he goes, oh, wow, okay. It gave me some credibility with him. And, but again, you learn to, the object of the game here is to make sure that you're doing the right thing, take good care of people. And the company I worked for really did that. And that I got a really good basic training on taking care of people and doing the right thing.
And you sort of transitioned from that to a very big job and a very illustrious career at Safeway. How did that come to pass?
Well, I was working at I worked at Zenith Insurance Company in Southern California for a while as their VP of claims, and my family was living here. My kids were in high school, and I came back up to be around them for the last few years because I knew that they were going to move out and they would never come back. I didn't realize that Boomerang actually works for kids. They do come back. But I was looking for a job, and right in the middle, right after September 11th, actually, I was looking for a job. And so a friend of mine called and says, Safeway has a workers' comp job. And I said, oh, really? And so they hired me to be their workers' comp person. And then about a year into it, the CFO came to me and said, Bill, you're going to be the risk manager. And so I said, oh, well, we have somebody here. And he said, yeah, he's going to retire and you're going to take over. He said, it'll take me a little while for that to happen, but, and that's what happened. So they gave me the job. At the size of, we were 60 billion in sales. We're one of the largest grocery companies in the country, and largest trucking fleet west of the Mississippi, manufacturing, distribution, the whole bit. And I was responsible for the safety, the workers' comp, the liability claims, emergency planning, and a whole bunch of other things. And it was a remarkable experience in terms of learning on the job, but having extraordinary support from people like Connie and the brokers and others to help make sure that I was not going in the wrong direction.
For sure. So that sort of leads into the second song that you chose, which is it's a banger. It's Rocky Mountain Way. Everyone knows Joe Walsh. Maybe not everyone knows it was part of his band Barnstorm. What made you choose? We're going to listen to a bit of that because I have a question about it. But what made you choose that song? Why is that in your top 10?
Actually, that was my wife and I went on our first date to go see Barnstorm at Winterland in San Francisco, and we just hit 45 years this summer.
Congratulations!
And so it was our first date, really.
That's a great story in and of itself.
I mean, it's exactly our point that music is tied to people's lives, and it's a perfect example of it. So I want to play a little bit of it. There's a line in the tune in it that I want to address with you. But Mariah, can we start a little bit of the tune? I'm sure everyone knows it, but let's hear it. That's the line, right? So you have Rocky Mountain Way, 1973, Joe Walsh, right? He appeared on the Howard Stern Show, 2012, and he gave an interesting take on how the lyrics came to him. I'm going to read the quote. It says, I'm living in Colorado and I'm mowing the lawn. I look up and there's the front range of the Rocky Mountains, and there's snow on them in the summer, and it knocked me back because it was just beautiful. And I thought, well, I have committed. I'm already in Colorado, and it's too late to regret the James Gang. The Rocky Mountain Way is better than the way I had because the music was better and I got the words, bam. So my question to you is the phrase better than the way we had, I think sort of sums up your career. Always trying to find better ways to get better outcomes. And where would you say that was most prevalent in your time at Safeway as a risk manager?
It started like almost my first few days there. The process that they had for claims administration was that they would stipulate or agree to provide lifetime future medical for these people. And it created a huge backlog of cases that were still open and required a large amount of capital to take care of the collateral costs. And so I walked out on the floor about the second or third day, and I said, all right, there's two things going on here. First of all is you think your job's to say no, instead of saying yes. And so if you bend over backwards far enough so that you have a rug burn on your forehead, you're about right with taking care of the injured workers. That's the exact quote I used. And I said, secondarily, is we're going to compromise and release every single case. I don't care if they're still employed or not employed. It's not correct to keep these people artificially tied to the workers' comp system and making them think as an injured worker instead of as a productive worker. And so we are going to CNR every claim. And a supervisor looked at me and said, I had heard you were evil, but I did not know how evil you were. Which I thought was, I looked at her for a moment. I thought that takes a lot of guts to say to the vice president when you're a supervisor. But we had 15,500 open cases when I started. And within, again, about 4 years, I had it down to about 5,000 open cases because we were settling every case. And that took a couple $2 billion of collateral off of our exposure. And so that saved us a lot of money. And it also, by the way, the other thing that was really neat about this is everything has an unintended consequence. You got to be very careful about the instructions you give out. And so one of the things I looked around and I said, you don't want to see in our cases, do you? And everybody says, no, we don't want to see in our cases. And I said, okay, here's the deal. I promise you this. I will not fire one of you for doing your job. If you're going to compromise and release a case, it's not going to be in your caseload. What are you going to end up with? And a very bright examiner said, oh, a lower caseload? And I said, exactly. So don't worry about getting fired for doing your job. Just do your job and do it well. And I will take care of you.
I mean, that's a crazy culture shift, change.
You know, when I was a baby claims adjuster, they took me out in the back room. They taught me the secret handshake. And then they said, if they're still working there, you do not CNR. And I thought,
just for the audience, CNR, just in case.
Is compromise and release. It's a full and final settlement
right. Instead
of stipulation to provide lifetime future med and pay out the permanent disability over the course of time. It's a lump sum settlement.
Okay.
And it is fascinating how to this day you still have pockets of people who will not, if the employee is still there, they won't settle it out as a lump sum because they're afraid of several things. One, they're afraid of people will go back to the office and wave the money around and say, oh, look at the money I got for the settlement for the workers' comp, and then you'll have 5 or 6 more. Or people will come back on the same body part again and again, kind of routine. And in the entire time we did that, you could count on one hand the number of claims where the person then alleged the same body part when we'd already settled it out. It just doesn't happen. But the myth that it happens is always there. Another thing that I went down to Southern California, Vaughn's office in Southern California. They were denying 40% of the claims, and I said, I sat down with them and I said, why are you doing that? And they said, well, because they're denying 40% of the claims in Arizona, we want to beat them. And I said, you know, Arizona might have a slight different set of laws and regulations than we do in California. And they said, oh, yeah, we know that. And I said, well, my guess is that you win 0 at the appeals board. And they said, yeah. And I said, oh, by the way, what is our reputation at the appeals board? And one guy says, oh, it's shit. And I go, okay. We're not here to deny claims. We're here to take care of our injured workers. And the CFO, who was the local CFO, was sitting to my right. And I said, by the way, how much is this costing us? And the claims manager said, oh, millions of dollars. And by then I look over and the CFO has his head down on the table. He's just like, I can't believe I'm hearing this. And so again, culture shift. We said, no, we're going to take great care of the injured workers, the right care at the right time. I said, you know, my criteria for medical care is this. I said, I will not send my coworkers to anybody I wouldn't send my daughters to. And that was my strict criteria for who I would allow to treat our injured workers, because they were my coworkers. And years later, the lobbyist for the Teamsters says, you know, Bill, it's really strange. About such and such a day, we stopped getting complaints from Safeway. What happened? And it coincided with me starting at Safeway. And I said, no, I don't know. What do you think?
It's really interesting hearing you say, no, we're not here to deny claims. We're here to take care of our injured coworkers. It's really akin to the shift in medical care generally. We discussed when I got to meet you for the first time that, doctors are now saying, I'm sorry, when lawyers used to say forever, don't ever say that. It's a real shift.
That's a big shift, right? And another, I'm not sure if this is a digression, but another really important lesson I learned at Safeway was about certain kinds of people and the problems that those claims have. And it was one day I was sitting in my office, and because there wasn't a lot of room at the corporate, I had my medical director's desk next to mine in my office. And I turned around and said, Mel, I don't get it. We've not had any quads, any paras, any amputations, any head injuries. I mean, our safety programs are really working in terms of this, but my severity is going up. And Mel goes, well, Bill, that's because these people have poor coping skills. And I said, what are you talking about? I said, well, they have adverse childhood experiences and they have poor coping skills. In the comp industry, you have a certain number of claims, and I term the phrase, you have sisterhood of the traveling body part injury claims, where it starts at one body part and then it goes sort of all of a sudden you have a totally disabled individual and you go, what happened? And the answer is this. These are the people who have had adverse childhood experiences. These are the people who have poor coping skills, and they get in the hands of the wrong attorney or the wrong doc. And there is a financial incentive to disable these people for the attorneys, because the greater the disability, the greater the amount of fees the attorneys will get. And misplaced incentives in the comp system are part of the endemic problem of the structure. But for these people, what we found is if we could identify them early, intervene with counseling and support, it was extraordinarily successful.
I just love the way you talk about it. Let's go to the next song, which is The Boxer by Simon and Garfunkel. And we'll play that. And then I'll ask you some more questions around that last topic. Okay.
Cool.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Mariah. Can you cue up the song?
I am just a poor boy, though my story is seldom told. I have squandered my resistance for a pocket full of mumbles, such are promises. All lies and jest, still a man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest.
So in that little clip, we don't get to the part that is so memorable, and that's the refrain around "Lie, la, lie," which is, whenever I've been in a group where that song comes up, everybody sings that part when it's simple, but it's so remarkable. The other reason that I love that you chose this song, you and I met in New York City. And of course, Simon and Garfunkel are quintessential New Yorkers. And part of that song was recorded, I did not know this before John did some research on it, was recorded at St. Paul's Chapel at Columbia University in New York City, which is a beautiful place. And also in Nashville near John. So it was a great song, great choice for this. But the song's lyrics take the form of a first-person lament as the singer describes his struggles to overcome loneliness and poverty in New York City. The final verse switches to a third-person sketch of a boxer. In the clearing stands a boxer and a fighter by his trade, and he carries the reminders of every glove that laid him down or cut him till he cried out in his anger and shame. I'm leaving, but the fighter still remains. So we already walked into some of the question that we had around this song, but it almost feels like this is a perfect metaphor for many workers making their way through the work comp system. You talked a little bit about some of the work you did around adverse childhood experiences and claimants. How did you come to that? You must have had was it a personal feeling, or was it something you noticed in the claims? Please tell our listeners all about it.
Again, I think it was my medical director who really set me straight on that. And I didn't understand why people with minor injuries could become so disabled, and why people who had extraordinarily severe injuries would brush themselves off and get back to work. I mean, I didn't understand why. And most people don't, but it is actually the social coping skills. It's the ability to deal with adverse situations. It's not having the support group. It's having the support group. It's having your support of the employer and your family and your friends that help you recover. And so that's the key. And most people don't understand that we have to deal with the whole person, not just with this injury, because this injury is that person, and that person's the important piece of the puzzle. And so we don't do a great job of really finding out who they are and what they need. And that's the opportunity. The industry's moved towards advocacy is what they call it. But I think the next level, if you will, of advocacy is engagement. And you have to engage with the patient and get them engaged in their recovery. And if you can do that, then there's no end to what we can do in terms of getting the people well and getting back to work.
Do you think it was just serendipity that your medical director saw this, and then, of course, you had the presence of mind to embrace his view? Or do you think that all medical directors sort of saw this and others in your shoes didn't embrace that view, since you just said we don't do a great job of it?
That's an interesting question. First of all, not many risk directors or VPs of risk have the medical directors sitting in their office, which is somewhat helpful. I'm sort of joking about that, but the reality is that I think a lot of the doctors know about it or knew about it, but I don't think that they were then figuring out what can we do from a claims administration perspective to really make a difference. Safeway was at the time known for innovation, if you will, on what we were doing with regards to our focus on, again, we were the first large self-insured to start compromise or release every single case. We had a significant focus on the right care at the right time, those kinds of things that were early, quite in front of much of the rest of the industry with regards to how people took care of the injured workers. Another little story that's on point, and that is that I'm not a doc. I had 1 year of physiology in high school. And my first job, I was calling, very first day on the job, the supervisor threw 4 files at me and says, call the doctors and tell them whether or not you authorize the surgeries. And I thought, 1 year of physiology, I almost flunked that, and you want me to tell them whether or not they should be doing surgery? We have the wrong people making the wrong decisions a lot of the times in terms of having claims. I saw a study that said claims adjusters make the correct decision on to approve or not approve care 48% of the time, which means that there was a study, that was a pretty interesting study, and that meant that if I had trained monkeys flipping coins, I would have done 50%, which would have been better, right? And so having claims adjusters making medical decisions, I think, was completely wrong. And so one of the first things I did is I put nurses right in the middle of the claims staff. And I said, you as claims adjusters shouldn't be making medical decisions. That's the wrong thing. You're not physicians. You don't know what you're doing. And that helped improve the quality of care. That was another major change, if you will, that to this day, you still have claims examiners approving. They're legally allowed in California and other places to approve, and in other states to deny medical care. And it doesn't make sense to me.
The more I learn, the more I'm convinced of the old adage that if you just play the game the right way, the scoreboard takes care of itself. All right, let's jump to your next song. Now, you said it earlier, I grew up with the Stones and the Beatles. So, gun to your head, are you a Stones guy or a Beatles guy? Before we get to this song, which one?
Actually, Beatles, I would say.
Okay.
I've been to more Stones concerts. I stood outside the Cow Palace when they did because I couldn't get in, when they had the Beatles had their concert at the Cow Palace. But I saw individually a lot of them, but I never saw the Beatles together.
Yeah, I most of my friends are Stones guys, but I'm definitely a Beatles guy. So we share that bill. Connie, do you have a choice if you had to
Stone,
make one? Stones,
Stones.
of course, Connie. Okay, well, anyway, Mariah, let's play. Everyone knows it. It's the Beatles. Mariah, let's play that, and then we'll talk about it a little bit.
When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. And in my hour of darkness...
Well, of course, Let It Be, right? It's a Beatles song. Our first Beatles song on the podcast. Likely not the last, Bill, but you are the first. Released March 6th, 1970. 30 days before my brother was born, May 6, 1970, and it was a title track on their album, Let It Be. At the time, just doing a little research, had the highest debut on the Billboard Hot 100, beginning its chart run at number 6 and eventually reaching the top. It was the Beatles' final single before McCartney decided he needed to leave the band. And of all the Beatles songs, Bill, why that one?
Actually, that album was the first album I purchased, and
Still have it?
Actually, I do.
My man.
And
we should have set this up ahead of time. I have you hold it up right now.
It's actually I have it framed downstairs, but it was the first full album I purchased.
Such a great album, by the way. You know, all of it.
It is.
Top to bottom.
It is.
Such songwriters. Interestingly enough, so McCartney said about the song, he had a dream about his mom during a tense period surrounding a session for the White Album. And, of course, she died of cancer, Mary, in 1956 when he was 14. And his quote about it was great to visit with her again. I felt very blessed to have that dream. So that got me writing, Let It Be. In a later interview, he said about the dream that his mother had told him, it will be all right, just let it be. Now, of course, that reached number 1 in 1970, certified 2 times platinum. Interestingly enough, the lyrics and his point about letting it be is certainly nothing you've ever done in your career. In fact, I hear you and see you as the exact opposite. Nothing is as it was. It's how can we make it better? One of the interesting things we've discussed, and I'd like to hear your take on it for the audience, is in the work comp arena about misdiagnoses, right? Instead of just letting it be, we're not going to stand for that, and we're going to try to fix it. So tell us a little bit about how that affects the work comp industry generally.
Okay. I think, first of all, it started and starts with artificial intelligence. And my concern is that we're moving more and more towards artificial intelligence, where they're going to take the diagnosis, and from the diagnosis, they'll automatically be approving treatment protocols. And one of the pieces of that is that for 51% of the claims, they account for about 10% of the dollars. And it doesn't matter if it's a misdiagnosis. You can misdiagnose a thumb injury, and it can actually be the big toe, and it doesn't really matter because it's a minor injury. They'll be well and they'll get back to work. It's the very complex claims, if you will, that in my experience, my numbers were the top 3% of the claims accounted for 60% of my dollars. I mean, it was really skewed up into the top. And one of the problems you have with misdiagnosis is, first of all, in misdiagnosis, you don't have any data about workers' comp. And so I went out and did studies on misdiagnosis in musculoskeletal, misdiagnosis in emergency rooms, misdiagnosis in clinics, misdiagnosis for different kinds of things. And it's as high as 40% in some of these places. And the problem is if you do have a misdiagnosis, then you're automatically going to be approving care. You're going to go in the wrong direction. And what you really want to have is some guardrails that will get you back on the right direction. And I had not seen anybody in the entire industry talk about this. And so for me, what I'm trying to do is raise the question and the issue for us in the industry, saying, listen, We have to be careful about this, particularly for the more severe claims. We want to make sure we're getting the right care at the right time. And so what are we going to do about identifying, and how are you going to make sure that we are getting that right care? And part of that problem is the misdiagnosis. And so I wrote a pretty extensive paper on it. I'm trying to get the industry to think about this so that we can make sure that they think about where they're going to put the guardrails. But I think that there are some early indicators of, if you have a misdiagnosis, if they're not progressing on the recovery correctly as you would expect to see, you have to start questioning the diagnosis kind of routine. And there's other things that'll go on. I just think that I don't have all the solutions, but what I do have is a concern that we need to be aware of this, and we need to take care of it as an industry.
Interesting. Are we ready to move to the next song, John?
Sure.
All right, good. So our next song, the one that you chose, was written by an iconic female rock star before she joined the band. The star is Grace Slick, and the band is Jefferson Airplane, later to become Jefferson Starship. The song is White Rabbit, and the year is 1966. Interestingly, Grace taught the song to the band, who recorded it for their album Surrealistic Pillow. And White Rabbit is in the key of F sharp, which Slick acknowledges is difficult for guitar players as it requires some pretty intricate fingering. So let's open to the opening of that song and the intricate fingering that I mentioned.
Yeah, this makes me want to stand up and dance.
It's a classic song. It peaked at number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100 at the time, and it's only ranked number 478 on that Rolling Stone list of 500 greatest songs of all time. I don't know what to make of that, but let's talk a little bit about why this particular song. What is it about this song that made you choose it?
Grace Slick's voice. I think she was the best all-time voice, woman's voice in rock, one of the most powerful voices. And that is a very, very fast song. I mean, very short. Really, it's just a couple minutes, right?
Yep.
But her singing was spectacular in that. And I think we don't celebrate women, particularly in rock, enough, and her voice enough. And I just really, really enjoy that song because of that.
I agree. It's very, very powerful. Even her tune, Somebody Love, it's just, she just belts it out, right? It's very alluring. It's very great, easy to listen to. And you're exactly right. She really is a powerhouse, a real rock star, female rock star. She's great.
One of the things that really struck me about reading about this song was that she later commented that all fairy tales read to little girls have a Prince Charming who comes and saves them. But Alice did not, and she very much was in charge of her own destiny. She was on her own in a very strange place, but kept on going and followed her curiosity. That's very interesting in relation to you, because I've always felt you have an intense curiosity about our business, and the White Rabbit is your curiosity. In an interview with the Wall Street Journal, Slick mentioned that the other inspiration for this song, besides Alice in Wonderland, the fairy tale, was Ravel's Bolero, which was another song that you had chosen. Did you know that there was a connection there?
I had no idea.
It's incredible that both of those tunes, she feels like it's just a constant, over the course of the tone, which is exactly what Ravel's Bolero is, and they match. And you put both of those on your list. Music is something else. It's just fantastic.
I go through 5 or 6 or 10 years of the same song going through my head, and or longer even. And so it drives my wife crazy when I'm unconsciously whistling Ravel's Bolero. Music is, there's certain things that give us that positive feeling about who we are and what we are, and make us feel better. And so people get the running high when they run. And so physical activity is one of those. But we don't really appreciate just how much there's a few other things that do that. And music is actually one of those things that will give you that high, if you will. And, there's a certain note in the middle of, when Pavarotti hits a note, or when in certain other songs, or in Rocky Mountain Way, when they come back in with the guitar, you can feel the back of the hair on the back of your neck go up, and you can just feel it, right? And that feeling that you get is so good. It's pretty neat.
Couldn't agree more.
That's great. Well, so talking about curiosity and maybe a little bit about the hair on the back of your neck standing up, you followed your curiosity all the way to the governor's mansion in California. Can you tell our audience a little bit about that? I feel like I lived part of it with you, but I think that's a great story, and I'd love everyone to hear it.
Well, when I first started at Safeway, my boss said, are you going to be able to fix comp? And I said, I can fix us, but I can't fix comp because it requires legislation. And so I worked very hard at the beginning fixing Safeway. And then I was at a conference in San Francisco, and there's this guy sitting there. I'm an hour early, he's an hour early, and I said, I'm Bill Zachry, who are you? And he says, I'm Brian Perkins. I said, what do you do? And he says, well, I'm chief of staff for Jackie Spear. And Jackie Spear, at that time, later went into Congress, but at that time was my local senator. And the very end of the conference, he was a workers' comp conference. He comes to me and says, what would you do if you could fix comp? And I said, well, I'd do this one thing. And this is in December. And so basically.
What year, Bill?
I think it was 2002. And January of the next year, I get this call from Brian. He says, Bill, what do you think of your bill? And I said, what are you talking about? And he says, this is your bill to fix comp, just like you said. And I was floored. And I said, wow. And he says, yeah, you can look at the wording, et cetera, and so forth. And I didn't know that I would spend the next 4 years, 2 or 3 days a week in Sacramento lobbying, basically workers' comp costs in California. The Schwarzenegger bill saved the employers about $152 billion so far, I think. And then the Governor Brown bill has kept things flat ever since then. So the cost before we got the legislation through for the employers was $6.75 per 100. It is currently $1.67, and it's been about $1.65 to $1.67 ever since we got the bill through.
What were the key pieces of the bill that made that change?
Oh, there was quite a bit of it, actually. And I think the real key, though, get back to the original themes, right? The right care at the right time. At one point, the doctors were allowed to do treatment without any controls, and they weren't following evidence-based treatment guidelines. And specifically, we put in a requirement here in California that the doctors will treat in accordance to evidence-based treatment guidelines. And that meant that they were no longer performing 5 and 6 and 7 unnecessary back surgeries and things like that, which really was a huge savings for the employers and a protection for the injured workers to keep them from being abused, if you will, by the system. And so quality care, care at the right time. It's astonishing how effective that can be and bring down the costs and keeping them steady.
Hearing you say it, and over the last time we've been together on this podcast, it just seems so reasonable. It's just a wonder that it was never done before. Occam's razor, I guess. I don't know. It just seems just natural, and yet it wasn't.
It seems logical, but when you get the special interests driving the process, it changes.
Well, you think about what you just said, it seems logical, right? You both have said it. It's exactly how the AI paper that you talked about just a few moments ago, it just seems logical that this is what you would be doing. And how quickly we often miss the logical answer.
There's too many things that we can do to take care of the injured worker, but we have to get them engaged in the process. And I think that's the next level in terms of what I want to accomplish in the industry.
Well, that sounds like a good segue to the next song then, John.
Our last song that we're going to feature from Bill's list is an all-time tune. Everyone knows it, American Pie, written by Don McLean, released in 1971. The album, the same name, single was number one in 1972 for 4 weeks, and it's listed currently as the number 5 song on the RIAA Project Songs of the Century, kind of like Bill's career. American Pie has been described as one of the most successful and debated songs of the 20th century. Again, just like Bill's career. Let's Mariah play a little bit of it, and then we'll talk about it.
Time ago, I can still remember how that music used to make me smile. And I knew if I had my chance that I could make those people dance, and maybe they'd be happy for a while. But February made
lyrics, clearly the crash of Richie Valens and Big Bopper and Buddy Holly is a big part of this song. Lyrics abound in this song everywhere, right? And actually, McLean, even for a long time, repeatedly declined to explain the symbolism behind many of the characters and the events. He just said they're beyond analysis. They're poetry. So what is it about the song, Bill, that made you put it on your list?
For many, many years, it was my favorite song. And, it's funny. Rolling Stones are in there, right?
Yep.
It's what's really fun, actually, to do on this song is to go back and do the research on the meanings, even though McLean basically didn't say you should do that or can do that. But there are just so many references to so many other musical genres and hits and things, the Byrds, you name it, kind of routine. And so it is actually quite deep with regards to, if you Google it and then start looking at the meanings, my wife and I were driving back from Yosemite one time, and we basically, while one was driving, the other was reading these kinds of issues, and we got almost all the way home. It was a several-hour discussion on just the meaning of this song kind of routine. It's pretty neat.
Yeah, it's a fantastic song. So the song's 8.5-minute length meant it couldn't fit entirely on the side of a 45 RPM record. Of course, we're 78 here. So United Artists had to put the first 4 minutes, 11 seconds on the A side and the 4:31 on the B side. Radio stations used to only play the A side, but then they eventually switched to playing the full song because audiences wanted to hear. So for me, Bill, and just getting to know you in this short while, it's clear your career doesn't fit on one side of a record, not even a 78 RPM one, let alone 45. McLean, looking back on America with nostalgia, how would you look back on your career? I know you have a lot to offer still. Of course, you were risk manager of the year in 2014, perhaps a highlight. But if you look back on your storied career, what are you most proud of?
I had an occasion to spend some time with somebody else who had a career event. And it was an unfortunate career event where he was the guy who wrote the World Trade Towers 2 months before they got hit. And it's fascinating when you have something that does define your career to other people. And for many years, I thought my career was going to be defined by the workers' comp legislation. And then the risk manager of the year really did change a lot of that in terms of it. It was another defining moment beyond just workers' comp into the risk management field, which I'm very, very proud of. I think for me, though, when I look at my career, my best accomplishments are my friends and the acquaintances and the people I've gotten to know who have made me who I am. And I don't want to be too schmaltzy about it, but I value my friends very highly. I appreciate them tremendously. I have made some extraordinarily wonderful friends and have met some extraordinary people in this industry. And I've been very, very lucky about that. And that's, for me, is the highlight of my career.
Very well said. It makes me think of the story. We didn't talk about it, but maybe briefly, the Swiss Re story, right? Just after 9/11. To your point that you've met some extraordinary people, some people in this industry have had the privilege of meeting you too. So that's a two-way street, one you should be proud of as well. But let's hear that story real quick.
Really quickly. So back in the day, Swiss Re was investing in credit default swaps, had a very, very severe problem, and it was announced that they were on the ropes. And so I told my this is a property side, and I told my broker I want to talk to my underwriter Reto, and my broker says, that's not good, Bill. And I said, well, I want to talk to Reto tomorrow morning. And so he's in Switzerland, I'm in California, so I call him dark 30 in the morning, and it's late in the afternoon. And I said, Reto, here's the deal. Swiss Re's been around 150 years. I know you're going to be around another 150 years. And I wanted to call and let you know that Safeway stands beside you. And he's Swiss, so he goes, thank you, Bill. And that was our entire discussion, right?
Full of emotion. He was so overwhelmed.
It was, and so in the meantime, Berkshire Hathaway put a couple $2 billion. They took a 20% quota share, bucked them up. They're fine now. Yeah, they were fine. And 6 months later, I walk into his office. I sit down, and Reto goes, Bill, I'd like to thank you for the phone call. And I said, I literally thought for a moment, what is he talking about? Because I forgot I had called him 6 months earlier. And I said, oh, I meant it. And he looked at me and he says, I know you did. And so dinner that night, I'm sitting with Reto, and we're at the Rathskeller, and I think it's the Rathskeller.
There is one. Yeah.
Yeah. And in Zurich. And I said, Reto, I'm just sort of curious who else called. He goes, in all the world? And I said, sure. And he goes, well, you did, Bill. And my relationship with that company and with those people, the chairman knew, the president knew, everybody knew that I'd called. And I meant it because I knew that part of I don't know if I mentioned this, but I told him, I said, I know that you would stand beside me if I had a loss, so I need to stand beside you now. But, I was very fortunate, being of a size, I was fortunate enough to have, with Connie and with other people in the industry, was able to develop those kinds of relationships where they knew I was there for them as much as they were there for me.
It's a great story, not only for industry veterans listening to this podcast, but for up-and-comers. There's nothing like relationships in this business, and your story is a perfect microcosm of that. Thanks for selling it.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, we haven't talked about what you're doing today. We've talked a lot about what you've done, why you've chosen the songs. What about as an executive director of CompSense? You want to talk about what you're doing there?
When we passed the legislation, the 899, the 863, one of the things that I had seen in the industry is that employers would get and professionals would get engaged in legislation if it really is that bad, But once they got the legislation, they declare victory and go home. And so I put together a group that basically helped write the regulations for these bills. And it really turned out that those regulations are as important as the legislation if you want to really get the results you want to get. And so currently as CompSense, what we're doing is I'm working with California Division of Workers' Comp, trying to help them transition on the regulatory side from hard copy to soft copy forms and other things that are going on in the industry. And I bring together experts and professionals who are frontline practitioners to make sure that those regulations that we do write work practically as well as operationally. In other words, you want to make sure that the people can actually do the work of the regulations and they can do it effectively and it'll get the results you want to get. And in the industry, it's a three-legged stool. It is legislation, regulation, amicus. And one of the problems you have is that the amicus side is usually ignored. The regulation is not really attended to. And if you tend to your garden well, you will get some good flowers. And so I'm trying to tend to the garden so that we can get some good regulations. And that, as the executive director, I'm looking for young, bright people who want to be involved in the process. And we're trying to train the next generation on this as well as get the results that we're trying to get.
Noble cause, Bill. Thank you.
Yeah. Just continuing to do the right thing.
Yeah.
It's amazing how that works, isn't it?
Any last questions, John?
No, I just appreciate the time, Bill. I'm sure our listeners will as well. It's a fascinating conversation. You're a fascinating guy from sort of humble beginnings and a real terrible experience to sharing that essentially with a ton of people and making better outcomes. It's really a great story.
It certainly is not. It is unique, but I think that there's a lot of other people who really, really want to make the system work well. As you know, just because I have that experience doesn't mean that I'm that unique. I think there's a whole bunch of folks who really want to make the place work well, and it's nice to be able to work with a lot of people to do that. It's pretty good.
Humble to the end, Bill. I love it.
I do have one more story, and then I don't know if you have the time, but
sure.
One of my favorite stories about Winston Churchill is that he was sitting next to Lady Esther, and she at a dinner, and she says, "You, sir, are drunk," and he says, "You are ugly, and I will be sober in the morning." And I desperately wanted to be the vice president when I was 30, and I made it at 30. And I used to play racquetball. And so very early in the morning, I'd get up at 5 or something, and I'd put on my ratty blue pants and ratty shirt and everything, go up to racquetball. But I was very proud of myself when I said, "The vice president is off to racquetball." And my wife opens one eye and she looks at me. She says, "You're still ugly in the morning." And, I think that's so important because you have to remember you are ugly in the morning, right? I have to, you can't get caught up in the hoopla. It's important to remember you're just another person, and these other people who get injured are the important ones. They're the ones you really want to take care of.
We're a service industry.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Agreed.
You bet.
Well, we thank you very much for joining us on this podcast and sharing your story, Bill.
Thank you very much for allowing me. I had a great time. It's great to see both of you. And if there's anything that I can do, I'm quite happy to do it to make the process work, to make the system better. Just let me know what you need.
Great.
Thank you, Bill. It's very nice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so version 2.0 or episode 2.0 of Insurance at 78 RPMs is a wrap. We want to thank our guest, Bill Zachry, our esteemed guest, Bill Zachry, Executive Director of CompSense, Industry legend, risk manager of the year
in the morning.
Yeah. I was going to leave that out, Bill. But thank you, audience. Connie, thank you for another great episode. And We'll see you all in the next one.